Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Alex moved to the edge of Desert Crest, all he wanted was peace, coffee, and sunlight. What he got was war. A ruthless HOA queen, sabotage in the night, and a legal battle that would ignite a neighborhood revolution. This is how solar panels sparked a suburban uprising. I didn't buy my house to make a statement. I bought it to get some goddamn peace. After 15 years designing power systems for high-rises and data centers, I wanted to spend my mornings with a mug of coffee, not a conference call. The house was perfect, a modest stucco home on the edge of Desert Crest Estates, just outside of the HOA's clutches. Literally, their jurisdiction stopped exactly one lot before mine. Their rules, their fines, their pastel lawn conformity, none of it touched me. The solar panels were a no-brainer. 36 state-of-the-art photovoltaic beauties installed as part of the federal Green Grid program. I didn't even have to buy them. Power West Utility owned the system, I just leased the surface space. In exchange, I got energy credits, a fat federal tax deduction, and the smug satisfaction of watching my electric bill wither like a HOA newsletter in the rain. It was clean, efficient, and fully permitted by the county. Life was quiet. Until she arrived. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished aligning the inverter when a white Lexus pulled up and idled in front of my driveway, like a sheriff in an old western. A woman stepped out, 50-something, crisp beige slacks, visor, clipboard. She didn't walk up to me. She inspected me. "Hello," she said, tilting her chin like I was a student late to class. "I'm Karen Davis, president of Desert Crest Estates HOA. "Congratulations," I said without looking up. I was rechecking voltage conversion. She didn't laugh. "You've installed solar panels without architectural review approval. They're on my house, which is not part of your association." "That's debatable," she sniffed. "Your home faces Desert Crest and visually impacts our community standard." "Visual impact isn't jurisdiction," I replied, turning fully toward her. "These panels are part of a federal infrastructure lease. They're owned by Power West. You have no standing. You'll be receiving a formal notice," she snapped, turning back toward her Lexus. And she wasn't kidding. That Friday, I got the first envelope. Desert Crest Estates, unauthorized external modification, $1,000 fine per day of non-compliance. The next day, a second envelope with a photo of my roof and a passive-aggressive note about neighborhood harmony. I laughed. Then I called the county records office just to amuse myself. Yes, they confirmed. My parcel was unincorporated land not subject to HOA rules. Yes, the permit for solar was valid. And no, they didn't care what Desert Crest thought unless they tried to enforce something outside their boundary. I thanked them and made a copy of the zoning map. Then I taped it to my mailbox with a sticky note. "Not your property, not your problem." The next day, the sticky note was gone. That weekend, I caught her again. She was standing on the sidewalk, phone in hand, snapping pictures of my roof like she was documenting a crime scene. I stepped outside with a beer. "Smile," I said. "The sun's finally paying my mortgage." She didn't reply. She just turned and stormed off. That's when I knew. This wasn't about panels. This was about control. And I just installed 36 square meters of rebellion on the edge of her perfect kingdom. At first, I thought the letters were a bluff. Something she sent to scare off the weak-willed, the HOA's equivalent of a bark with no bite. But Karen Davis wasn't barking. She was foaming at the mouth. By the end of the second week, I had received 7 separate envelopes from the Desert Crest Estates Architectural Compliance Committee, a committee I didn't belong to, representing a neighborhood I wasn't part of, citing bylaws I wasn't bound to. Each letter was thicker than the last. Photographs, diagrams, citations of something called the Uniform Neighborhood Aesthetic Doctrine, which sounded like it had been lifted straight from a Cold War propaganda manual. The fines were laughable at first, $1,000 a day, compounded, plus something about a visual restoration penalty. By day 10, their made-up math claimed I owed them more than my annual electric bill, which was ironic because Power West was giving me a monthly rebate for feeding energy back into the grid. I filed every letter in a folder I labeled Karen's fan mail. Then came the emails. Someone must have dug up my consulting website. I started getting complaints via my professional contact form, all variations of, "How can someone who claims to support sustainability live in such an eyesore?" and "Solar is fine, but not when it ruins." The neighborhood view. One particularly poetic message accused me of rooftop pollution. Still, I ignored it. Let her play HOA warlord from across the fence. She had no legal leg to stand on. I wasn't in her fiefdom. But then, Karen escalated. I came home one afternoon to find a city zoning notice stuck to my door. Anonymous complaint submitted to the Architectural Review Commission. It claimed that my solar installation violated municipal rooftop design symmetry, a rule that didn't exist. I called the office. The clerk audibly sighed. "Let me guess," she said. "Desert Crest." Bingo. We've been getting a lot of those. All dismissed. I asked how many "a lot" meant. She said, "Including yours? 12 in 2 weeks." That's when I started documenting everything. I printed every email, scanned every letter, made backups of my security footage, and stored it all in both digital and hard copies. You don't work in infrastructure for 15 years without learning one universal rule: paper beats petty. Then came the HOA Facebook group leak. A neighbor I barely knew, Jason, 2 houses down, engineer like me, slid a manila envelope into my mailbox. No return address. Inside, screenshots, Karen ranting about me, calling me a techno-anarchist, claiming I was poisoning community aesthetics, and trying to sabotage resale value for the entire block. One post said, "He thinks he's untouchable because he doesn't pay dues. But if we make his life miserable enough, he'll leave or cave." That line stuck with me. It wasn't just about the panels. It was about forcing obedience. I posted one image in response. A clean photo of my roof, the panels gleaming in golden hour light, captioned simply, "Outside your borders, outside your reach." It went mildly viral in the neighborhood. That same night, someone tore down the zoning map I had taped to my mailbox. Again, a few days later, Power West sent a notice thanking me for maintaining access to their equipment and reminding me that the panels were leased federal infrastructure. I printed it out and taped it in a laminated sleeve to my front window. 3 more complaint letters came in that week. One claimed glare from the panels was blinding passing drivers. Another accused them of emitting unnatural sounds. One was a hand-scribbled note in loopy cursive that simply read, "You're not welcome here." HOA means harmony, but harmony, I realized, was just their code word for control, and I'd become the one variable they couldn't account for, the solar-powered heretic at the edge of their empire. And I wasn't going anywhere. I was in San Diego when it happened. Just a quick 3-day trip, speaking gig at a green tech expo, a few networking dinners, nothing unusual. I had my neighbor Mike watching the house, watering the plants, keeping an eye on the place. He's retired Army, the kind of guy who still mows his lawn diagonally because it trains discipline. It was just after midnight when he called. "Alex," he said, "you need to come back. Now." I sat up in the hotel bed. "What happened?" "2 guys, unmarked van. They climbed up on your garage roof. I caught them unbolting one of the mounts on your panel rig." My chest went tight. "You're sure?" "I've got it on video. I called the cops. They showed up, scared them off. But your gear took a hit." By the time I got back the next evening, the damage was clear. 2 panels on the western edge had been forcibly removed, not detached, ripped off. One was cracked clean down the middle. Another had its mounts sheared and was left hanging half off the frame. The inverter housing looked like someone had taken a crowbar to it and lost patience halfway through. Cables were frayed, connectors mangled. The whole lower array was offline. I stood there staring at the chaos on my garage roof, fists clenched so tight, my nails dug half moons into my palms. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't vandalism. It was an operation, methodical, intentional, and very, very illegal. Mike handed me a flash drive. "Footage is all here. They were on your roof for about 20 minutes before the squad car rolled up. Got their faces, tools, even the ladder." "Did they say who they were?" He nodded. "Told the officer they were hired by Desert Crest. Said they had authorization to correct a code violation." My stomach turned. I called Power West immediately. Their rep didn't miss a beat. "They what?" she said, voice rising with every word. "That's tampering with federal energy infrastructure. They damaged our assets. We'll be filing charges." Within 24 hours, Power West's legal team had issued a formal cease and desist to Desert Crest Estates, complete with a line that made me smirk through the rage. Any further unauthorized interference with utility leased equipment will be treated as criminal destruction of federally supported infrastructure. I made sure to print that and stick it right next to the HOA's last fake fine letter on my fridge. Art, really. But the thing that broke the dam, the thing that took this from petty HOA feud to an outright war, was what Mike told me next. I saw her hand them the key. I blinked. What key? Gate key. I recognized it, the same model Karen gave to the landscaping crew last year. They parked around the corner, then she walked out, handed them the key, and pointed toward your garage. Like a damn field marshal. Did the cops take her statement? They tried. She told them she had no involvement. Claimed it was a routine HOA correction under emergency authorization. Didn't even blink. I spent the rest of that night compiling everything. Photos, videos, the damage report I'd written out like it was an engineering postmortem. The quote from a certified solar tech who'd inspected the system and said it would cost upwards of $25,000 to restore generation to full output. The estimated production loss alone, around 12 megawatt hours over the next quarter. I emailed the whole package to Power West's counsel with a single subject line: escalation. The next morning, Karen was out walking her Pomeranian as if she hadn't just greenlit a borderline federal crime. I watched her pause across the street, glance up at my roof, and smile. I smiled back. War it was. I didn't even have time to pour my coffee before the phone rang. The caller ID said Power West Legal, which I assumed meant another round of paperwork. Instead, the voice on the other end was chipper, a little too chipper for a Tuesday morning after a felony. Mr. Walton, just a courtesy call. We've filed our initial complaint. You'll be pleased to know Desert Crest Estates HOA has been formally notified of their catastrophic mistake. Which part, specifically? Let's start with unlawful access, property damage, and interference with leased federal infrastructure. Oh, and we've also looped in the Department of Energy. Since, this falls under Green Grid. I stared at the wall for a beat, then just muttered, good. An hour later, I had the printed letter in hand. It wasn't a cease and desist. It was a declaration of legal engagement. The kind of document that smells faintly of blood and toner. Highlights included damage to federal infrastructure, contractual breach of power generation, estimated liability of $280,000, plus penalties. They'd even itemized the cost per kilowatt hour of lost production. At the bottom, in bold, any further interference will be treated as a federal offense. I laminated it and stuck it inside my storm door for visitors. Karen naturally refused to blink. That afternoon, she posted in the community next door feed, a screed in all caps. Federal overreach is not welcome in our neighborhood. This is about visual uniformity and protecting our skyline. Solar panels are a threat to aesthetic standards. She ended with, we fight for the purity of our desert view. It was hard to know whether to laugh or buy her a tinfoil crown. But Power West wasn't playing anymore. That same week, they sent a field inspector out to document the scene. They brought a photographer, a structural engineer, a lawyer in sunglasses, all of them walking my roof like it was a crime scene, because it was. The engineer's verdict: the entire west bank of the array needed rebuilding. The inverter had to be replaced. Estimated restoration: 30 days. Production loss: massive. Revenue loss: worse. Their legal rep turned to me with a smile that had more teeth than warmth. We're going to hang them with this, she said. Meanwhile, Desert Crest doubled down on the crazy. I received a hand-delivered community correction directive from their so-called enforcement committee, signed by none other than Karen herself. It demanded permanent removal of unauthorized solar equipment within 7 days, or further collective legal action will be initiated on behalf of visual stakeholders. Visual stakeholders. That one I framed and hung in the bathroom. But things really turned when a local news station picked up the story. Channel 5 ran a segment titled Solar Showdown HOA versus Federal Energy. They showed aerial footage of my damaged roof, then cut to Karen outside the HOA clubhouse, holding a binder and trying very hard to look not insane. These panels threaten our property values, she declared. They're not in line with our community's visual identity. Then, in what must have been an unscripted stroke of honesty, she added, we make the rules here, not the utility companies. Not the government. This is our neighborhood. Next came Power West's PR team. They weren't subtle. Their official statement: Desert Crest Estates HOA has not only interfered with federally leased infrastructure, but done so arrogantly and repeatedly. We intend to pursue full legal remedies, and we invite other homeowners affected by similar HOA overreach to contact us directly. The floodgates opened. Emails started coming in from other homeowners in nearby communities. One family said Desert Crest had once forced them to remove a backup generator because it wasn't beige. Another said their Tesla Powerwall was declared a visual nuisance and ordered dismantled. Several said Karen had visited them personally, clipboard in hand, to suggest voluntary compliance with design norms that didn't even exist. And then came the call from the Department of Energy. No warning. Just a man named Daryl, credentials in D.C., clipped tone like a military accountant. Mr. Walton, we've been briefed. We're opening an internal review. Green Grid funding comes with federal protections. Desert Crest HOA's actions, if confirmed, may constitute a breach of federal energy security. Sounds serious. HOAs don't get to unplug the sun, he said. That night, I posted a single update, a photo of my half-demolished panels. Caption: You tried to shade the sun. Now the sun is coming for you. Karen reposted it on Nextdoor, calling it threatening language. The irony was almost poetic. I thought I was in the middle of a ridiculous turf war. What I didn't realize, not then, was that this wasn't just about my roof. It was about every roof Karen had ever tried to conquer. It started with a knock on my door. Midday. I opened it, expecting another notice or a solicitor pushing pest control. Instead, I found a man in khakis and a faded polo, holding a reusable grocery bag and looking like he regretted every decision that brought him here. Hi, he said. I probably shouldn't tell you my name. Let's just say I'm on the HOA board. Or was. Look, I shouldn't be here, but... He glanced over his shoulder like he expected a drone strike. You want to come inside before Karen spots you? I asked. He nodded so fast I thought his neck might snap. We sat on my patio, the damaged panels humming faintly above like wounded soldiers. He stared at them a long moment before speaking. She's been pushing this for years, he said. Not just solar, anything she thinks messes with her aesthetic vision. I raised an eyebrow. This a sanctioned HOA term, or just something she whispers into her wine glass? He cracked a small smile. Bit of both. He told me stories about how Karen bullied a retired couple into painting their porch because the shade of blue was too coastal. About how she pressured a single mom to rip out her raised garden beds because they weren't flush with the ground. She once tried to get a permit pulled on a neighbor's home office because the skylight reflected into her backyard at an uncomfortable angle. Then came the power stuff. She's been targeting homeowners with independent energy systems, he said. If you had a generator, she called it noisy. If you had batteries, she called them fire hazards. One guy had a power wall installed. She cited him for non-conforming wall coloration. Let me guess, I said. He wasn't in your jurisdiction either. Bingo. Turns out, Karen had been pushing a quiet campaign for over 2 years to extend Desert Crest's HOA map. She'd even drafted a proposal to amend their charter to include visually contiguous lots, which is HOA code for people whose property we can see and, therefore, think we own. The plan never passed, but that didn't stop her from acting like it had. She calls it soft enforcement, he said. Send letters, apply pressure, cite imaginary rules until people fold. I asked him why he was telling me all this now. Because she crossed a line, he said. Before, it was just intimidation. This time, she damaged federal equipment. She lied to us, said you'd agreed to have the panels removed. That Power West gave her verbal permission. I checked. No such thing. He handed me a USB stick. Meeting recordings, emails, internal docs. She's been planning this since your first panel went up. He left in a hurry, like the guilt had finally outrun the fear. I watched him disappear down the street and wondered how many others were sitting in HOA meetings nodding in silence, terrified of becoming the next target. The next morning, I sent the drive to Power West and added a note. You'll want to hear meeting number 3, timestamp 42-119. That afternoon, my mailbox was stuffed with flyers. The front read, Save our skyline, say no to rooftop chaos. Inside were grainy, zoomed-in images of my house, with ominous arrows pointing to the panels, next to phrases like visual terrorism and unauthorized solar installation threatens neighborhood identity. I laughed. Then I flipped the flyer over and stopped laughing. Karen had listed my full name, address, and even the date I moved in. It ended with, "Let's show him who this community belongs to." I brought the flyer inside, scanned it, then dropped it in the growing file labeled Exhibits. That night, Channel 5 ran another update. This time, they had a new headline: HOA allegedly targeted multiple homes with unlawful energy restrictions. The reporter even cited an unnamed board member who claimed Desert Crest had a pattern of hostile enforcement practices. The reporter closed the segment standing in front of my house. My damaged panels were in the background, gleaming under floodlights I'd installed just that morning. Then came the final twist of the week. I woke up to a knock and opened the door to find a man in a gray suit holding a badge. Department of Energy. Not a field rep this time. An investigator. "We're moving forward with the inquiry," he said. "We'll need a full copy of your installation agreement, maintenance logs, and any evidence of harassment or interference." I just smiled and gestured to the stack of labeled folders on my table. "You came to the right place," I said. The courthouse smelled like anxiety and copier toner. I'd been in courtrooms before, as an expert witness, never as a plaintiff, but I'd never imagined standing across from a suburban HOA, flanked by a utility company and shadowed by the federal government. And yet, there I was, suit-pressed, folder in hand, watching Karen Davis sit at the defendant's table like she was attending a brunch that had gone terribly off-script. The gallery was packed. Some HOA members showed up to support her, mostly the usual sun hat and golf cart crowd. But I also recognized a few neighbors who'd quietly slipped me thumbs up over the past weeks. A local news crew sat in the back row, cameras banned from the room but pens scribbling like mad. Power West opened the proceedings with a tone that could cut steel. Their lawyer, young, sharp, probably named something like Bryce, laid out the facts with surgical precision. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a dispute between neighbors. This is a case of deliberate interference with a federally leased energy infrastructure program. The defendant, acting as president of the Desert Crest Estates HOA, authorized unauthorized individuals to trespass on private property and tamper with equipment belonging to Power West Utility, equipment protected under the Green Grid Initiative." He handed over binders thicker than a Bible. Then he clicked a remote and brought up photographs of my damaged panels, the frayed inverter, the partial disconnect. The judge, a silver-haired woman with an expression like dry stone, narrowed her eyes at the image. Karen's attorney stood, smoothing his cheap jacket like it would add credibility. "Your Honor, Desert Crest's actions were motivated purely by community aesthetics. My client believed, mistakenly perhaps, that the equipment in question violated neighborhood harmony and sought only to restore visual conformity." The judge looked over her glasses. "By ordering a rooftop demolition on private property," he coughed. "There were misunderstandings." Then came the evidence dump. Power West submitted the lease agreement showing that the panels were not mine, but theirs, a utility-owned asset installed under federal contract. They followed that with the incident report, quotes from contractors on the damage, lost kilowatt-hour revenue figures, and, my personal favorite, a highlighted clause from the Green Grid Protection Act stating that willful disruption of authorized generation infrastructure shall be prosecutable as a federal violation. Then it was my turn. I took the stand and laid it all out: the letters, the fake fines, the bogus complaints, the midnight operation. I played the footage of the contractors on my roof, narrated like a grim nature documentary. Observed the unauthorized HOA predator in its natural habitat, tampering with solar arrays. Then I produced the flyers with my name and address, Karen's quotes from the Facebook group, and the infamous visual stakeholders notice. The court clerk asked if visual stakeholder was a legally recognized term. I told her I'd checked. It wasn't. Not even in HOA bylaws. But what really shook the room was the recording. From the anonymous board member, timestamp 4219, Karen's voice clear as day. "I don't care who owns the panels. If we make it ugly enough for him, he'll take them down. Or he'll leave." There was a visible shiver through the room. Even a few of her supporters looked away. Karen's lawyer tried to object. The judge waved him off like an annoying fly. Then, the pièce de résistance. Footage from my security cam showing Karen herself handing keys to the contractors. Date stamped, time stamped, labeled. The judge leaned back, steepling her fingers. "Ms. Davis," she said. "Do you have a response?" Karen stood. She looked more irritated than nervous, like she'd been caught sneaking extra scones at a tea party. "I was doing what I believed was in the best interest of the neighborhood," she said. "These panels, they've ruined the character of Desert Crest. I was elected to preserve that." "By authorizing an illegal break-in?" the judge asked. "I didn't," she faltered, then tried to pivot. The board agreed. The judge glanced at the transcript. "Actually, they didn't. You told them you had verbal consent from Power West, which you didn't." Silence. The rest of the proceedings moved quickly. The court recessed for deliberation, though it didn't take long. When we returned an hour later, the room held its collective breath. The judge read the ruling aloud, crisp and measured. Desert Crest Estates HOA is found liable for unlawful interference with federally protected infrastructure, trespass, and property damage. The HOA is ordered to pay $550,000 in damages to Power West Utility and $120,000 to Mr. Walton for personal, structural, and emotional damages. She turned to Karen. "Ms. Davis, the court finds you personally responsible for incitement to trespass and misrepresentation of authority. You are fined $25,000 and sentenced to 1 year of supervised probation." Karen's face was stone. For the first time, no smug smile, the judge added one final mandate. The Desert Crest Estates HOA charter shall be amended to explicitly prohibit enforcement actions outside its jurisdiction, effective immediately. It was done. But no one clapped. The silence was heavier than any applause, and Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of conformity, sat down like she'd been dethroned. The moment the gavel fell, something shifted. Not just in the courtroom, in the entire damn neighborhood. I walked out into the Arizona sunlight, and it felt a little brighter, or maybe it was just the contrast after weeks of cold legal fluorescence. My attorney from Power West clapped me on the back and said something like, "Hell of a win." I wasn't really listening. I was watching Karen. She stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by two men in wrinkled suits who suddenly looked like they regretted ever returning her calls. Her posture had changed. Less queen bee, more deflated scarecrow. Her phone rang. She didn't answer. The headlines rolled in fast. HOA loses landmark solar case. Utility company sues HOA and wins big. My personal favorite, Arizona HOA tries to block the sun. Gets burned. That one made the rounds on late-night TV. The check from Power West hit my account 3 days later. Not the damage settlement, but something they called a disruption impact stipend. PR compensation, essentially. 15 grand, no strings attached. I used part of it to replace the inverter and install a new camera rig on the roof, one with motion tracking and night vision. The rest went into savings, maybe for a second system on the back structure, or a hot tub. Solar-powered, obviously. Desert Crest, meanwhile, was in free fall. The board fractured almost overnight. 3 members resigned within a week. At the next HOA meeting, held in the clubhouse I was never invited to before, residents demanded accountability. Turns out, not everyone liked being dragged into federal litigation over a grudge match they never voted on. Karen predictably tried to hold her ground. She made one final post on Nextdoor. Desert Crest will not be bullied by outside interests. We will rebuild. This community will not bend to solar intimidation or state coercion. The comments under it were brutal. People brought up their own stories. Threatened citations over lawn ornaments. Fines for having unapproved mailbox paint. One woman mentioned Karen forcing her to remove her daughter's basketball hoop because it was too urban. The mask had finally slipped, and no one was in the mood to pretend anymore. The kicker came when the revised charter went into effect. It explicitly prohibited enforcement beyond the HOA boundary, meaning all those years of soft jurisdiction Karen claimed over adjacent lots? Gone. Overnight. I printed out the clause and taped it next to the breaker panel in the garage. Just for the poetry of it. About a month later, I saw a moving truck outside Karen's house. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even make eye contact when we crossed paths at the mailbox. She just kept her head down and her clipboard tucked under her arm like a wounded animal pretending not to limp. For the first time in months, I opened my gate and didn't immediately check for sabotage or spies. The panels hummed quietly above me, fully repaired, soaking in sunlight like they'd never been touched. The HOA, for the first time in its history, held an open vote to reduce dues. Apparently, lawsuits are expensive. And from what I hear, Karen's house went on the market with a special note in the listing: adjacent to HOA, but not under jurisdiction. A selling point now. Imagine that. The panels gleam now like nothing ever happened. You'd never guess that just months ago, this roof was a battleground. 36 solar soldiers, perfectly aligned, humming softly above my head like they've been vindicated. And in a way, they have. Restored, upgraded, and now fully under round-the-clock surveillance. Not that it's needed anymore. There's a new sign on the edge of my roof. Nothing flashy, just a simple metal plate bolted beside the motion camera. It reads, "Electricity isn't a crime, and I'm not your neighbor by choice." I didn't think I'd leave it up for long, but the reactions have been satisfying. Power West ran a feature on me in their quarterly newsletter, called me a case study in civilian resilience, whatever that means. CNBC asked for an interview. I agreed, half out of spite, half because someone needed to say it on air. They wanted clean skies. What they got was a clean verdict. The producer emailed me after the segment aired, said their inbox flooded with messages from people all over the country. Folks dealing with overreaching HOAs, small-town tyrants, and neighborhood committees that thought property lines were just suggestions. A woman from Nevada told me she printed my quote and taped it to her solar battery unit. It was strange. I'd started this just trying to power my house. Now I'd apparently powered a small movement. Desert Crest changed. After Karen left, the neighborhood felt like it exhaled. The new HOA board, if you could even call it that, was made up of residents who actually gave a damn. They stripped out most of the more absurd policies, killed the Architectural Purity Subcommittee entirely, and started encouraging practical improvements instead of punishing cosmetic ones. They even invited me to one of their meetings. I declined politely. Old habits. Still, they asked if I'd speak at the next community sustainability event. I agreed, on one condition: no clipboards allowed. When I stepped onto that stage, just a community center podium with a broken microphone, people applauded. Actual applause, not for winning, but for fighting, for drawing a line and saying, "This far, no further." And it wasn't just words. 2 other homes near the edge of Desert Crest filed to formally detach from the HOA. One guy installed his own solar system, full off-grid backup, custom panels. I helped him install it. We shared a beer on his porch after and watched his meter run backward. Funny how rebellion spreads. Now, when I walk down my street, I get nods. Respectful ones. Some people even smile. I still keep to myself mostly. Old engineer habits, but it feels different now. Like the hostility evaporated with Karen's SUV. One evening, a small envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a note, handwritten in careful, uncertain cursive. I didn't speak up before. I was afraid. You showed me I don't have to be. Thank you. There was no signature. I didn't need one. And sometimes, when the sun hits the panels just right, I sit back in my chair, take a sip of black coffee, and think. Turns out the brightest thing on this roof was never the panels. It was the line they drew.